brings us now to the final one of the three external governance systems we're going to consider. There are others, so there are many of them, but we've looked at three of them. And the first one to do with network theories. Many successful and growing industries and firms operate on the basis of informal networks. In a way, it's similar to institutional theory, but institutional theory is about formal networks, formally representing institutions. This is looking at informal networks. This is a way of applying some of the social media adaptations, some of the ideas of social management theories that have been developed actually to predate the technology of social media, many of them, but into the ideas of social media itself is kind of taking up from the network theory. And there are companies like some quite big ones. Silicon Valley, for instance, is very common with people working between them, supporting one another. Italian textiles, film, music, etc. These are all areas in which network theory has grown up and been proved to be quite a successful way. And again, it's a way of dealing with a very uncertain, changing environment. It's about saying instead of having a big company that could suffer very badly if there's a change in the environment, so lots of small, very adaptable companies that can hopefully bounce around and find new ways of dealing with business. It's also small ones. I mean, for instance, one example I often use is my own gardener, as in not my gardener, he's the gardening company that do my gardens. There's a number in the villages around York of small gardening companies. And although they don't specialise, it is sometimes the fact that we come out and we find somebody from a different company doing our gardening because they're all 1-2 man operations. And they don't so much subcontract, they simply agree to send one another out. So I can't do John's lawn today. Also, it can be specialists, for instance. They might not all have the same specialist equipment. So when my lawn needs reseeding, uh, and it needs actually it's rather just scattering seed the top of it, some of the seed needs to be put in every couple of years. There's only one company that has that, and so that guy comes out and does it. And the guy who has mine has different types of equipment, so will do things. So these people all bring together and provide things. And it's often the key thing about network theory is it is often very, very, very informal. So what is the background to it? Well, it is basically a very flexible specialization approach. It's often called neo-Smithsonian. And the proponents of the flexible specialization approach, which I said is known as the neo-Smithsonian approach, believes that changes in the international economy, especially in the early 1970s, forced firms to switch from mass production to a new tactic known as flexible specialization. Instead of producing generic goods, firms now find it more profitable to produce diverse product lines targeted at different groups of consumers, appealing to their sense of taste and fashion. Instead of investing huge amounts of money on the mass production of a single product, firms now needed to build intelligent systems of labour and machines that were flexible. I.e., this varied, for instance, like from my gardener who owns one machine and his friend who has a similar gardening company owns a different machine. But also, it might be to do with the fact that the people who make the movies, some players might be specialised in digital electronics, some players might be specialised in dubbing, some players might be specialised in recruitment of actors, and they all bring them together as a collective. You often see films advertised being produced by a number of companies, and this might be the way they both do it. The same with making music. The band might be one company, the gig might be another company, the providers of the cutting of the making of the demos, the recording is another thing. There are lots of music festivals around, lots of music recording studios, etc. This all brings it round together. And so what we do is people try to save on investment. So production processes become modular and can be put together in a variety of different ways. They become a very flexible way of approaching it. And this involves changing the production structure, whereby instead of a single firm manning the assembly line from raw materials to finished product, the production process becomes fragmented as individual firms specialise on their areas of expertise. As evidence of this theory of specialisation, proponents claim that Marshallian industrial districts or clusters of integrated firms have developed in places like Silicon Valley, Jutland, Smarland, and several parts of Italy. So effectively what you've got here is these places that have become put together in areas, and we have little versions of that perhaps around the universities. Here we have a science park, it's not a very big one here, but around Cambridge, the huge science park specialising in biotechnology, and they want to support one another. They build up these areas where actually a kind of infrastructure that is needed for one big firm actually provided by a number of smaller firms working together. So in a way, networks are actually conglomerates which are not merged together. They're conglomerates that have maintained their independence but have become managed through network governance, in which almost socially people who go to the same parties together, people who live close together, sit on one another's boards, try and make sure all the companies act in the interest of the sociality of the things, and work together. And so what are the decision factors? Okay, they're basically What drives this idea is a synthesis of transaction cost economics and social network theory. Transaction cost economics says you make a decision whether to build inside the firm or to make outside the firm, depending on the varied costs of handling the transaction and whether or not it's best to come in. We talked earlier about why and how that decision is made. When you merge this with social network theory, you say, well, actually, if you can build up a system where you can start to trust one another, and that trust might be because you might not know the person, but other people might know the people. So if you look at them and you say, oh, we need someone to do this job, and instead of actually looking just get people to make quotes, you go to a company you've worked with a lot and say, do you know of a digital production firm, for instance, if you're making a movie, and they say, oh yes, this one we've used quite a lot, they are to be trusted. It says you can reduce your transaction costs based on this trust, based almost on this second-hand trust. Okay, so you're overcoming the simple question of whether it's the cost that determines going internal and external. You're saying, can you actually reduce transaction costs? Say, yes, you can. Social interactions, people partying together, people understanding one another, people mixing together, people knowing one another, actually reduces the costs of firms. And in areas of high uncertainty, like one film can destroy a company, one band can make it or not on the CDs, how do you know? Same with gaming and that sort of things. Well, this high uncertainty means that a very flexible approach encourages people to think in terms of flexibility, encourages people to think in terms of alliances rather than becoming permanently part of the same company. And so what sort of social networks exist? Well, the different sorts of social interactions that can lead to network governance can lead to people serving together on boards, between companies looking after one another, can be a wide variety of things. We have interorganizational, all equals, but legally distinct. We have straightforward networks. These are relationships that follow a pattern, relationships of relationships, where one person meets, allows you to meet other people, and it might be a friend of a friend idea, where you sit together. If they trust you, I trust you, like Casa Circasa, this sort of idea. We have alliance capitalism, the idea that firms actually act together for all of the organization's long-term interests. Actually, people say capitalism is not so much about competition, it can be about cooperation as well, because the defining force of capitalism is that accumulation, is investment, is the building up of wealth, but not building up as wealth as individuals, building up as wealth as productive capacity. There can be business groups. These can actually be business groups that are formally bound together, but they can also be informally bound together. And this is sometimes used for firms that are actually not really networks, that are not so much based on friends, but based on the fact that you go via the institution and you all have to agree to the rules of the institution. And if you break the rules, if you suffer one of the groups, you can be punished by the institution, by the network, you can be expelled from it, so you know in your long-term business. There are networks of informal collaborators, where there's actually not necessarily a pattern of things, but where people work together, there's no contracts, etc. Work on one-off contracts. There are network organizational forms where you actually have people do the same thing over and over again. So you have long-term recurrent business exchanges between them. And this, of course, can lead to sort of a good development of long-term trust issues, etc. The true social network, as in this is before the idea of social network is a computer-based thing, but as an individual thing, back for the people work together. People work together, it's driven by trust, it's informal, it's based on the fact that A trusts B, so B will trust, and A trusts C, so B will trust C and will work with C. And that. There's a more formal network organisations in which they actually are the governance, there's the market-based governance. So market-based governance here in this case means you don't have an informal collaboration. What you actually say is, we're going to work together, and actually I'm going to buy 10% of your shares and you will buy 10% of my shares, and we will put a member in each board. That is the difference between network organisations and network organisational forms. And even more confusingly, we have the network forms of organizations. And these are where we have lateral or horizontal. We have a standard supply chain, which you'd expect to be caused by a merger of different companies. But among these things, they have independent resources. All the different forms of organizations are independent. They own independent resources. They hire out to each other independent resources. They may go in work together with reciprocal communications, they talk to one another. They will often have integrated computer systems, integrated IT systems that allow those systems to work together and talk together as well. So there's a big financial commitment towards working one with another, but it's not quite the same as the other things. So these are the different areas that can lead the importance of social interactions.